Hey, what's up everybody? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day that you are deciding to watch this video. So hopefully you've watched the other two videos. Precipitation, Newton's laws. So now we're going to dive into the forces that cause wind to move. So we're taking that second law, that Newton's second law situation, the force equals mass times acceleration, or force equals pony times a pony. What are you doing? And so we're going to focus on one of those laws, or one of those forces, excuse me, which is the pressure gradient force. So we're going to think of the pressure gradient force as we've talked about air pressure, right? And so air pressure is like the amount of atmosphere on top of your head. And now we need to try and determine how, where it goes. Like what's the direction that this force points, right? So kind of going also back to that idea of when I talked about Newton's laws and there was gravity, and gravity always points down. Because gravity is always putting us down. And so with the pressure gradient force, we need to try to determine what is happening with that. So to try and visualize this idea, on the slides I have the pressure gradient thought experiment, and then in my fun little brain I decided to try and make a little experiment that I can try and show you, and we'll see if this works. It may or may not work. So, what I have here is, Pony, you might need to move for this one, but don't look at me like that. Okay, so I have a glass of water and a Tupperware with a lighter in it, and the lighter is kind of taped down because I wanted to try and be standing up as if it were a human. Right? So what I'm going to try to do, maybe try and angle this downwards a little bit first. So I'm going to put don't worry, it's a dead lighter. We're not sacrificing lighters here. So I'm putting the lighter, putting the Tupperware over the glass right now. Right? And so what I'm going to do is very carefully go upside down and scare Pony from the squeaks. So as we can see, in this current demonstration, might be a little bit hard to see, sorry. So the lighter is still kind of to the side, but it's still kind of standing upwards, and that was the point. So we're pretending that the lighter, here we go, we'll face it this way, that the lighter is like a person, right? And so the way to think about pressure is how much, in this case, how much water is surrounding the lighter or person. So if I were to lift the glass up, so right now there's a water pressure or pressure exerted on the lighter all around it, right? And so, so if I were to lift the glass up, where would the water go? So think about this for a second. What direction would the water go? Would it just go in, your favorite band, one direction? Would it go upwards? Would it go downwards? Would it go all around? What would happen, right? So for the lighter, there's more water on top of the lighter, outside the lighter, than there is outside, right? So we would say if there's higher pressure where the lighter is, there's higher pressure there than there is outside of it, right? There's no, for all intents and purposes, there's no water over here. It is warm in here because it's very hot outside. But, so our lighter, water, higher pressure, lower pressure. So the idea here is to show that with the pressure gradient force, everything moves from regions of high pressure to regions of low pressure. So we can try to emulate this in a way, right? So think about what you think is going to happen to the water as I lift the cup, and whoop, it all went outwards. It all went in all directions, splayed outwards, and now the lighter is having a moment, being a floaty. So that's just kind of a silly way to think about it. Thanks for sticking with me through that. and watching Pony get very scared. That was pretty funny. Anyway, so in terms of how we can think about that in lecture slides. So here's all of that, basically, right? So we had our glass of water, we had our lighter in it, we had higher pressure within the glass than outside of the glass. So the water splayed outwards, so thus the direction of the pressure gradient force vector is outwards, right? Goes from high to low, always high to low. Everything in nature is always from high to low, so that's kind of a way to think about that as well. And when we think about gradients, it's like, as you can see, like sort of in this little grade image here, like it's darker in the center and gets lighter as it goes out. It's not like, in this case, it's not like a super contrasted line from one to another. It has that nice sort of like gradient. You know, like sometimes you see someone who did like contouring on their face and you're like, oh honey, you need to blend down to your neck. Like, no, we need to, yeah, blend the gradient, right? Or if not, I don't know. Silly analogy. Listen, it's late, so my brain's going a little bit wonky tonight, so don't mind me. So that's kind of a way to think about it too, right? If there's like a really harsh gradient, it would be very present. In this case, there's not. Okay. So to put it in more like scientific ways, if we're thinking about the PGF, pressure gradient force, in a bird's eye view, again, I want us to try and think in terms of vectors. So I'm really trying to get us to, you know, kind of still consider this idea of, like how gravity is always pointing downwards, right? That's how we're trying to think about the pressure gradient force. What way is it always pointing? So it's always pointing, the vector is always pointing from regions of high to low pressure, and it always goes perpendicular to pressure contours. Perpendicular to pressure contours. Remember, perpendicular gives you that 90-degree angle. Parallel would be side to side, right? Perpendicular would give you like a plus sign. And if there were no other forces acting on that parcel of air, then the air would blow directly from high to low. It would blow directly from high to low in this case. I don't really know how to use the draw function on here without things going absolutely haywire, so we're going to just pretend I'm drawing from high to low. But that's not generally how things tend to work in our actual atmosphere. We have other things going on. But I do have a relatively simple explanation or a simple example when it comes to the pressure gradient force if we're basically just factoring in this idea of the pressure gradient force. And that's something called a sea breeze, and not the cocktail. Perhaps you've heard of this before, or maybe you've even experienced this before. If you've lived along the coast, you've probably experienced it, but maybe you didn't even know what it was called. So here we go. Sea breeze. Kind of complicated, but let me walk you through it. So we're going to start with, I have like a couple slides with all the same panels, so I'm just trying to walk us through it, right? So sea breeze, we know that land heats up faster than water, right? We talked about that when we talked about moisture. Water takes a ton of energy to heat up, whereas land doesn't. Going back to that analogy of when you heat up your toast versus heating up your coffee in the morning for breakfast, it takes a lot less time and a lot less energy to heat up your toast than it does to boil water for your coffee or tea. So land heats up faster, which causes a relative low pressure over land and a higher pressure over the sea. And this is all relative, right? So higher pressure over land because we have air that's kind of going upwards, so it's less dense, making the air a little bit thicker, right, in this relative area. And remember, everything goes from high to low. So we would then start this circulation in the upper atmosphere that would cause the air to go from high pressure to low pressure a little bit higher up, in this case at about 900 hectopascals. So the big thing to take note of here is like the contours, the horizontal lines here, and what happens to them over time. So with A, they're all parallel. In B, there's like a little bit of a thickness over land and then a little bit of a curve over the sea. And then As things move, air accumulates over the sea, creating a higher pressure at the surface. There's more atmosphere on top of your head at the surface here at the sea. And then the pressure gradient would cause air to accelerate towards the land, which would then create this sea breeze. So it creates this whole sort of circulation here, just from the sun being up, heating up the land, and the ocean not being as warm as the land, right? So it causes this really sort of beautiful circulation here. And then, so there's this exchange of mass between these two air columns, which is also accompanied by vertical motion, upwards over the land, downwards over the sea. And sometimes with this, we can actually create cumulus clouds along the coastline. Not all of the time, but sometimes we can, which is kind of an interesting little thing. And then maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, does this happen in the opposite way? Sure diggity do. It's called a land breeze. So same idea as a sea breeze, it's just whoop, opposite. So in this case, the sea stays warmer than the land when the sun sets. So this temperature gradient and thus pressure gradient creates this localized circulation here. Again, so this is actually a really good point. Local circulation. This isn't like a huge thing that's happening like along the entire coastline all the time. This is more of like a very local, very small scale circulation, just considering the pressure gradient force. Of course, in the real world, there's other factors at play, but this is kind of just trying to do its best at emulating this idea of just the pressure gradient force. So if you need to replay through that, that's the nice thing about this part being on YouTube. So you can pause, you can speed up, you can slow down, you can watch it again. You have access to all of these slides, you have access to this video. You can even try doing that silly little experiment that I did with the pressure gradient force thing, just to kind of like do it yourself, and so you can kind of like work through that together, or like you're on your own, or maybe you have roommates or friends in the class that might make it kind of fun. But that's kind of the idea with that. So when we return back to classes together, then we'll talk about some of the other forces that act on air parcels. And yeah, so with all of that, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for dealing with my antics and for seeing Pony being very cute and get scared with the sound. So thanks again. See y'all later.